This is your tech news briefing for Tuesday, December 13th. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Last fall, as Russian troops began massing near Ukraine's border, a small Western intelligence unit began tracking signs that Moscow was preparing to invade. It predicted Russia would likely invade Ukraine on February 23rd, U.S. East Coast time. And it did. The group of analysts behind the spot-on report wasn't from the US CIA or the British MI5. They were from the multinational chemicals company, Dow Inc. And they did their intelligence gathering using only open-source information. So what does this kind of publicly available intelligence say about where international spycraft is headed? Joining us to talk about it is WSJ intelligence and security reporter Warren Strobel. Hi, Warren. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. When we talk about open source intelligence gathering, what kind of information are we actually talking about?
So open source intelligence is basically the information world that is exploding all around us. It can be anything from YouTube videos to other social media to medical databases that are online in public to consumer business information that's online in public. It's just exploding at an incredible rate.
I mentioned Dow, the chemical company, having an intelligence unit that was able to write up these accurate reports using open source information. But are government spy agencies around the world also tapping this open source information?
Well, for 75 years, the CIA in particular, and it does turn 75 this year, has its culture, its whole mode of doing business really has been based on secret information, secret sources, secret operations, classified information. And they're very smart people, but they live in a world where everything is classified, where they operate in classified spaces. And there's a culture shift that I am told needs to happen in order for them to take more advantage of the information that's actually out there. And if it's not publicly available, it's publicly gettable. They then have to take that information, vet it, because we all know there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation online. And then they have to meld that into the reports that are also based on their secret sources. So it's quite a task. And from what I'm told, they're getting underway, but there's a long way to go.
You've been speaking with current and former U.S. intelligence officials. Can you tell us more about why it's been so hard for the CIA to make that culture shift you mentioned?
Part of it just culture shifts are hard, right? And the CIA is used to doing secret stuff with secret information, and they've had their ups and downs over the years, but they've done some really interesting things with classified information and secret sources in Russia and China and elsewhere. And there's been this sense in the CIA and other agencies that if it's not secret, it can't be important. That's just how they view the world. And I think the culture shift is starting to happen, but open source information, which comprises 80 to 90% of what the president or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff needs to know, they are still having trouble getting their head around the fact that the world is really changing around them.
So that's the U.S. Are other government spy agencies better at tapping this open source information?
I looked at China in particular, and I read this report where China has 100,000 people whose sole job it is to go out and look at publicly available scientific and technical reports that the United States and other countries produce all the time, to analyze those and to look at those for important information that China would want to know. Not only that, the Chinese culture is different where what we call open source intelligence, or the shorthand is OSINT, for them it's not like a separate thing. They see it all as part of one big picture.
What about the role of companies here when it comes to tapping this information? Are they more prepared than our spies?
It's fascinating, like Dow Chemical, which has a small intelligence unit, basically to protect Dow's business assets and people. And they were able to predict, at least as accurately as the U.S. intelligence community, the date of the Russian invasion. They were able to draw up escape plans for several people that they had who were in the Russia-Ukraine region. And they're just one of many. Almost every major company now has its own intelligence and protection unit that are staffed by former intelligence people. And in some ways, they can do it quicker and cheaper than the government apparatus.
You mentioned so many more companies have these groups. Is it just because the information is more available? Are there other reasons why companies are developing these, what seems like internal spy agencies?
I'm not sure I'd call them spy agencies because, Zoe, spy sort of indicates like you're running agents and doing stuff like that. There's certainly internal intelligence agencies or units, right? And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, as you said, there's so much more information out there that's available to everybody. including to us. And secondly, it's a dangerous world out there where if you're a major company that has people and assets all over the world, you need to know if a threat is growing that could put your people or your business at risk.
What are the risks for the US if it doesn't get better at doing this, particularly as you mentioned with China getting better and with these private companies getting better at collecting and analyzing this public information?
The COVID pandemic, I think, is one example where most people would say the intelligence community didn't do a really great job in terms of recognizing early on that this pandemic was happening and what the implications were. They still haven't been able to determine whether the source of the COVID virus was a lab leak or a natural transmission. Spy agencies will say, well, that's the CDC's job. We're not a public health agency. But the fact is COVID killed 1 million Americans and made many millions more sick. So the risks are that in the future, if you're the CIA and you have your secret sources, which are good, but if you don't kind of do the whole picture with the open source material that's out there and find the needles in the open source haystack, you may miss the next pandemic, the next kind of threat that comes out of left field, not to mention the challenge from China.
Now, one thing that might make it easier for China to get that bigger picture is that it just has fewer restrictions on what it can do with its citizens' information, unlike the US and Europe. So, what do officials you've spoken to say it'll mean for the US if China is just much better at using this open source information?
They may pick and choose from our technical advancements that are, scientists and academics love to report. In fact, it's part of their culture to report their findings and their research publicly. The Chinese may be able to pick and choose from that, gain insights that would otherwise have taken them years or decades, and leap ahead on kind of the next generation technologies like 6G, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all those. And they can then turn around. This is all in theory, but they could turn around and use those technologies to dominate industries or even for their own spying purposes.
All right, that was our reporter, Warren Strobel. Warren, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it for today's Tech News Briefing. If you want more tech stories, check out our website, WSJ.com. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for listening.